The wrench that cost $340 sat at the bottom of my koi pond for exactly 4 seconds before my son lunged in after it, work boots and all, cursing loud enough that the neighbors turned their sprinklers off to listen. My daughter-in-law shrieked, but not at him, at me. And the strange part, the part nobody in that backyard could explain afterward, was how quiet I'd been 3 minutes earlier when my own birthday cake hit the pavement upside down, frosting smearing across the flagstone like something had been buried there. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't so much as raised my voice. No one there understood how a man swallows something like that without breaking, and nobody could have guessed it would end with a splash. If you'd told me 20 years ago I'd do something like that, I'd have laughed you out of the room. I've spent my whole life being the man who patches things up, not the one who lets them sink. But if you've ever gone quiet just to hold a family together, if you've ever swallowed so much that you forgot the sound of your own voice, then stay with me a minute, because this one's for you. And before I get into it, do me a kindness, hit that subscribe button, and tell me down in the comments what part of the country you're listening from tonight. Alright, let me back up and tell you how a cake ends up on concrete. My name is Gerald Whitfield. Everybody who's known me more than 5 minutes calls me Jerry. I'm 66 years old, and I spent 31 years as a machinist at a tool and die shop outside Erie, Pennsylvania, the kind of place where your hands never fully come clean and your ears ring a little even after you stop working the presses. I retired 4 years back with 2 bad discs in my lower spine and enough scar tissue on my knuckles to map a small country. I still live in the house on Pinecrest Lane, the one my wife Doreen and I bought in 1988 for $11,000 less than the bank thought we could afford. She's the one who planted the dogwood by the porch. I'm the one who dug the koi pond by hand, one Saturday at a time, over the better part of 2 summers, because she'd always wanted to hear water moving when she sat outside with her coffee. Doreen passed 6 years ago this past March. Pancreatic cancer, the fast kind, 11 weeks start to finish. I was holding her hand when the machines went quiet. After that, Sunday cookouts became the thing that kept me tethered to something. Same grill, same yard, same folding table with the one leg I've shimmed with a matchbook so many times I've lost count. I still use her marinade, the recipe she scrawled on a recipe card in handwriting that tilted right, like she was always in a hurry to finish the thought. Soy sauce, brown sugar, a splash of bourbon, and this part she'd never tell anyone outside the family, a spoonful of instant coffee. Sounds wrong. Isn't. Every time I brush it onto a rack of ribs, I can see her leaning against the porch rail, telling me I'd burn them again, and being right about it more often than I care to admit. Grief doesn't leave you. It just teaches you where to set another chair at the table. My son Marcus is 34. Good kid, or he used to be a claims adjuster for a regional insurance outfit, sharp with numbers, gentle as a boy. Somewhere in the last few years, he got tired of standing in the middle, between his father and his wife, and he found it easier to just lean where the weather was calmer. His wife's name is Brooke, 31, works in brand partnerships, whatever that means exactly. I've had it explained to me twice, and it still sounds like she gets paid to be friendly to companies on the internet. She drives a white Range Rover that costs more a month than I paid for this house outright. And look, I never held the money against her. Young folks can have their toys. What I minded was the way she looked at people who didn't have as much, especially people my age. She never came at me straight on. She was smarter than that. She worked in little digs, dressed up as jokes. Jerry, you know they make grills with an app now, right? You could just tell it what you want and walk away. Still driving that truck? I didn't know they still made parts for something that old. Everyone would laugh along, and Marcus would give my shoulder a squeeze afterward like an apology he didn't have the nerve to say out loud. Dad, she's just teasing, maybe. But a joke stops being a joke somewhere around the 200th time it lands on the same man, and never once on the woman telling it. I let it go, year after year, for 2 reasons. Because I loved my son more than I loved my pride. And because in her last weeks, lying in that hospital bed with the tubes and the beeping and the terrible fluorescent light, Doreen made me promise her something. Don't let this family go bitter, Jerry. Whatever happens, keep the table full. I kept that promise longer than maybe I should have. The Sunday it happened started about as good as a Sunday gets. Late June, that kind of eerie summer where the lake breeze actually reaches you if you're lucky. It was my birthday, 66. Nothing special about the number. But Marcus had asked to host it at his and Brooke's place for once. A 2-story colonial out in Mill Creek with a pool shaped like a kidney bean and a deck that still smelled like fresh stain. I'd brought the ribs myself, done low and slow on my own smoker, wrapped in foil in the truck bed the whole drive over. Brooke had ordered a cake from some bakery downtown, the kind with a little gold foil box, and she made a show of setting it in the center of the table like it was the whole event. Everybody was there: Marcus, Brooke's parents visiting from Cleveland, a few of the neighbors, my late wife's sister Carol. For a while it was good, genuinely good. Marcus told a story about a claim he'd worked, an elderly woman whose house had flooded, and how he'd fought to get her the full payout even though his manager wanted him to lowball her. I watched my son's face while he told it and saw, for just a minute, the boy who used to help me change spark plugs on Saturday mornings, asking 100 questions with grease already up to his elbows. Then Brooke looked over at the smoker rack Marcus was setting up on the table and said, loud enough for the whole yard, "God, Jerry, that's a lot of ribs for one old man to eat by himself." Everyone chuckled, the way people do when they've learned it's easier to laugh than to sit in something uncomfortable. I smiled and said something about a man needing his protein. She reached across like she wanted a napkin, and instead her forearm swept flat across the cake stand, and the whole thing, 3 tiers, gold foil box, and all hit the flagstone with a sound like a dropped bag of concrete mix. Frosting sprayed up the side of the pool fence. My name, piped in blue script, ended up face down in the dirt of a potted fern. She looked at it for half a second. Then she laughed, that bright, easy laugh she uses when she wants a room to laugh with her, and said, "Well, happy birthday, I guess. At your age, one less slice of cake probably does you a favor anyway." Nobody laughed that time. Brooke's own mother studied her wine glass like it had suddenly become interesting. A neighbor's kid went dead still by the pool steps. I pushed my chair back, my lower back sending up its usual complaint, and I stood there a moment, looking down at what used to be a cake with my name on it. And I'll tell you something I'm not proud of, because I promised myself I'd be honest all the way through this. My first instinct, standing there with frosting cooling on the stone, was to apologize, to smooth it over, to tell everyone it was fine, no harm done, let's get back to the party. That's what 30 years of keeping the peace does to a man. It rewires the alarm in your chest so that somebody else's cruelty rings out as your own emergency to fix. If you've ever caught yourself saying sorry for something somebody else did to you just to get the air moving in a room again, you already know exactly the wiring I'm talking about. Then I noticed her phone sitting face up on the patio table, screen still lit from wherever she'd been scrolling before all this. No, I noticed my own wrench sitting there instead. The good snap-on one Marcus had bought me for retirement. The one I'd brought over to fix a loose hinge on their pool gate before the party started. It was still sitting on the table where I'd left it. I picked it up. Not hers. Mine. Something in me had decided, without asking permission from the rest of me, exactly what came next. Brooke frowned. "What are you doing with that?" I didn't answer her, because there wasn't a single thing left in me worth saying out loud. I walked 6 slow steps to the edge of that kidney bean pool, the one I'd helped pay for a solid third of when Marcus needed the down payment 2 years back, and I opened my hand. One clean drop, straight down into the deep end. I turned around and gave her back her own sentence, close enough to word for word. Well, one less tool for an old man to carry, I guess. The yard went dead silent for about 3 seconds. Then it exploded. Marcus went sprinting for the water's edge, yelling things I won't repeat here, kicking off his shoes at the pool ladder, diving in fully clothed after $400 of forged steel, like it might still be swimming away from him. Brooke's father stood up so fast his chair went over backward. And my son, my own boy, came up out of that water, soaked to the collar, hair plastered flat, and looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Dad, what the hell? That's a $200 wrench." "$340, I said, "with tax." Brooke's mother had her hand pressed flat against her chest, like she was checking for a pulse. And there it was, the real wound of the whole afternoon, and it had nothing to do with the wrench floating somewhere near the drain. Not one person in that yard, not my son, not anyone, had asked if I was all right after my own birthday cake ended up on the ground with my name in it. The only casualty anybody in that yard could see was a hand tool. I got my keys off the patio table. Nobody tried to stop me. Backing my old F-150 out of their driveway, I caught one last look in the mirror, Marcus standing there dripping, staring into the deep end like enough staring might make forged steel float back up to him, and Brooke with her arms crossed, already talking fast into her father's ear. I should have felt ashamed of myself. Instead, I felt tired. Not the ordinary kind of tired, the other kind. 20 minutes later, on Route 90 heading home, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A voicemail from Marcus, his voice still shaking, water probably still running out of his ears. "Dad, you have no idea what you just started." I played it twice, sitting in my own driveway with the engine ticking as it cooled. He was right. I didn't know. Not yet. But I was about to learn. For 2 days, nobody called to check on me. What I got instead were 3 text messages, and I want to read them to you the way I read them to myself at my own kitchen table, because the messages are the whole story if you know how to listen to what's missing from them. Sunday night, 8:40. "You need to pay Brooke back for that wrench. It came out of our joint account." Monday morning. "Dad, this is humiliating." Her parents saw the whole thing. Monday evening. "Brooke says if you apologize to her and cover the cost, we can put this behind us." I sat there with coffee going cold in front of me, reading those 3 lines over and over, doing arithmetic on everything that wasn't in them. Not one. "Are you okay, Dad?" Not one. What happened before the wrench? The house got quiet in that particular way. A house gets quiet when you've spent 30 years filling it with somebody and then suddenly, again, you haven't. The refrigerator hummed. The clock in the hallway ticked. Outside, the wind caught the grill cover and slapped it once against the deck rail, and I thought of Doreen hollering from the kitchen window that the darn thing would end up in the neighbor's yard if I didn't tie it down properly. Her chair still sat empty across from mine. Same worn cushion, same little burn mark on the arm from the time Marcus, 9 years old, set a sparkler down too close during a 4th of July that got away from us. I know people who clear a house out after they lose somebody, repaint, donate, start fresh. I never could. Every corner of that place still had Doreen folded into it, the seed catalog she never got around to ordering from. The chipped blue mug she claimed made coffee taste better, though I never once believed her and drank from it anyway, because she liked watching me pretend to. By Tuesday, somebody had posted something online, I don't know the details. Carol told me about it secondhand, some vague post about men who can't handle a joke at their age. Brooke's mother shared an article about grace and forgiveness in family relationships. And underneath it, somebody Marcus knew from college had written the line I couldn't stop turning over in my head. Sometimes people just get bitter as they get older. I chewed on that word for a long time. Bitter. Then I did what men like me do when the feeling gets too loud to carry with our bare hands. I found something in the garage that needed fixing. The latch on my toolbox had been sticking since spring. I sat down on an overturned bucket, took the whole thing apart, dropped a screw, and spent 10 minutes hunting for it under the workbench, muttering words Doreen would have fined me a quarter for. And the whole time, the same reel played behind my eyes, the cake hitting the stone, Brooke's laugh, Marcus diving after a wrench instead of asking about his father. Around 3 that afternoon, my neighbor Sal Petrucci showed up in my open garage door. Sal's 71, retired from the Water Authority, walks a fat beagle named Chubby twice a day whether Chubby's interested or not. He'd been at the party, started coming by Sundays with a bakery pie and some story about buying 2 by accident, ever since Doreen passed. "You busy?" he asked. I held up the latch like it was a full explanation. He nodded like it was. Stepped into the garage, hands in his pockets, which worried me, because Sal Petrucci is a man who can talk to a fence post for 20 minutes, and right then he looked like he'd rather be standing anywhere else. "Been chewing on Sunday," he said. "Haven't we all?" I said. He didn't smile back. "Jerry, that wasn't an accident. The cake." I stopped turning the screwdriver. "I figured," I said. "No," he said. "I mean, I watched it clean as day." She looked right at that cake stand. Then she swung her arm. Something cold moved through my chest. Suspecting a thing and hearing another man say it out loud are 2 very different weights to carry. Sal glanced toward the driveway, like he half expected that white Range Rover to come rolling up. Then he took a breath and gave me the rest of it. "Back in the spring," he said, "I was walking Chubby past your place around dusk. Brooke was out front with a couple of women, girlfriends I guess, laughing about something. I only caught one part of it clear." "What part?" I said. My neighbor of 19 years looked me square in the eye and repeated it word for word. "Once the old man's in one of those assisted places, this house is basically our lake cabin fund." For a second I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. My hearing isn't what it used to be. But we were standing 4 feet apart in a dead silent garage, and I'd caught every syllable clean. I laughed once, not because a single thing about it was funny, but because my body didn't know what else to do with a sentence like that. My house. The house where Marcus learned to ride a bike in that same driveway. The house where I held Doreen's hand while she stopped breathing, already itemized, already spent, in somebody else's head, on a cabin up near Chautauqua Lake. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat at the dining table with an old photo album and took the whole tour. Marcus, at 7, gap-toothed, holding up a Father's Day card covered in glitter that I'm pretty sure is still embedded in my carpet somewhere. Marcus, at 17, rolling his eyes at a prom photo. Marcus, at 25, laughing next to his mother at something I've long since forgotten. Then the newer pages. Marcus and Brooke at Christmas. Marcus and Brooke at Thanksgiving, her arm looped through his smile a little too polished for a family photo. And me, somewhere at the edge of the frame, half-cropped, usually the one holding the camera. I ran my thumb over an old picture of Doreen and asked the empty room, out loud, "Did I miss it? Did I let this happen?" I don't know who exactly I was asking. God, maybe. Myself, more likely. Had I gotten so afraid of losing my son that I'd made myself smaller and smaller until I fit neatly into the corner of my own family portrait? I reached for the phone to call Marcus. My thumb hovered over his name. Then I heard his voicemail again in my head. "You have no idea what you just started," and I set the phone back down. And I made the first decision in 6 years that had nothing to do with keeping anybody else comfortable. No shouting. No pleading. No posting anything online. I was going to pay attention. Quietly. Carefully. The way you listen to an engine that's trying to tell you the truth before it fails on you completely. Because if Brooke thought getting older made a man harmless, she'd mistaken my silence for weakness. And you don't spend 31 years around industrial presses without learning the difference between quiet and off. After Sal's visit, I stopped seeing Brooke as simply rude, and started seeing her as a woman working a plan on a schedule. Every backhanded comment, every unexpected favor, started looking like an invoice waiting to be printed. I told nobody. I confronted nobody. From the outside, my life looked exactly the same as it had the week before. On the inside, I was running diagnostics. The first patterns surfaced fast. My future had suddenly become the most popular topic in the family. Marcus stopped by one Wednesday with 2 coffees from the place downtown, and for half an hour, it really was good acclaim he'd closed. My tomato plants out back. The raccoon that keeps getting into my trash. It felt almost like it used to. Then, stirring his coffee without looking up, he said, "Have you thought at all about downsizing, Dad? This place is a lot of house for one guy." "Keeps me busy," I said. "You're back, though. Those garage stairs." "I appreciate you worrying," I said. And then, casual as talking about the weather, "You still got the original deed somewhere in the house? Just for our records?" There it was. Not loud, not dramatic. Just placed on the table like a coaster. "Somewhere," I said, and gave him nothing else, and watched a flicker of disappointment cross my son's face, a flicker I'd have missed completely a month earlier. Doreen used to say, Marcus couldn't lie his way out of a paper bag. Turns out he wasn't much better at hiding when he'd been handed an assignment. The next Sunday, Brooke showed up carrying a bottle of wine that cost more than my week of groceries, the first gift she'd given me in 8 years of marriage that wasn't secretly an opinion about how I lived. She complimented the ribs, asked about the truck, offered to have her landscaping guy come clean up my yard for free. I told her I liked doing my own yard work. I caught the quick, flat look she traded with Marcus across the table, the look married people share when a script starts going sideways on them. That look bothered me more than any joke ever had, because jokes are just weather. Looks like that are climate. The following week I had my regular appointment with Howard Kessler, my attorney of better than 20 years, the man who'd handled Doreen's estate, who I'd once played 18 holes with before we agreed never to speak of the scorecards again. Routine visit, updating a beneficiary form. Howard finished the paperwork, slid the folder across the desk, then leaned back in his chair. "Been going back and forth on whether to mention something to you," he said. My stomach tightened. "Go on." "Your daughter-in-law's office called mine a few months back." "About what?" "Not about your file specifically," Howard said carefully. "General questions. The kind people ask when they're curious how things work for an aging parent. She asked how conservatorships get established. Whether moving into assisted living changes ownership of a person's house." My jaw got tight enough to crack a walnut. "What'd you tell her?" "The only thing I legally could," Howard said, with the ghost of a smile. "Nothing. She never used your name. Didn't have to." We sat in that silence a moment, 2 old men reading the exact same page. Finally Howard said, "Jerry, I don't like assuming the worst about anybody's family. Neither do I said. But those weren't curiosity questions. No, I said. Those were logistics. I drove home slow that evening, not for the traffic, but because every mile dissolved one more excuse I'd been propping up for years. Maybe it's just her sense of humor. Maybe Marcus will notice eventually. Maybe I'm too sensitive about it. One by one, they all fell away. That night I stood in my garage a long while, tools hung exactly where my hands expect to find them, and I picked up a framed photo from our 25th anniversary. Doreen laughing because I'd burned the first batch of burgers that day. I ran my thumb along the glass and said it out loud to nobody. They think getting old means getting easy to move. The garage didn't answer me, but somehow, some way, she did. Next morning I called Howard before 8. I want to make some changes. What kind? The kind, I said, that makes sure nobody ever mistakes my kindness for a signature again. He was quiet a second, then said he'd clear his afternoon. Here's what surprised me most about all of it. The paperwork was never about revenge, and Howard never once treated it that way. He asked me one question that reframed the whole thing for me. What outcome lets you actually sleep at night, Jerry? And I thought about it honestly and told him, I don't want to punish anybody. I just don't ever again want somebody planning my future without asking the man who's living it. So that's what we built, across 2 meetings, and a session with an estate planner, a revocable trust, an independent trustee with no family ties, updated medical directives, powers of attorney rewritten clean, no traps, no hidden recordings, no theatrics, just a grown man quietly locking his own doors. And I'll tell you something strange. The day those papers were signed, Brooke got smaller in my head. For the first time in months, my world grew back out past the edges of her. Sal showed up one Saturday with 2 coffees and a question. You still got that old Nova out back under the tarp? Needs a clutch, I said. There's a swap meet out in Girard next weekend, he said, and shrugged. The particular shrug men our age give each other when we're being careful about somebody else's loneliness. Might be time. I almost said no out of pure habit. Then I heard Doreen, clear as if she were standing on the porch. You're allowed a hobby too, Gerald. The following Saturday, Sal and I stood in a gravel lot full of old Chevys and Fords, drinking gas station coffee while strangers argued about carburetors like it was foreign policy. Nobody there priced my watch. Nobody there asked what phone I carried. One old-timer spent 20 minutes telling me about restoring a '69 Camaro with his grandson. Another told me to stop by his shop any Tuesday I liked, and meant it. Driving home, I realized I'd laughed more in 4 hours than I had in the 4 months prior. The week after that, I started volunteering Thursdays at a shop downtown that rebuilds donated vehicles for veterans getting back on their feet, brakes, alternators, the occasional transmission that had no business still running. I came home filthy every Thursday night and lighter every Friday morning. Funny thing about helping strangers, it reminds you that you're still worth something, right at the moment your own family seems to have forgotten it. A month after the party, Marcus called. Where have you been? He asked. You've been hard to get a hold of. Out, I said. Fishing some. Volunteering some. A pause. You never told me any of that. You never asked, I said. Silence. Not angry. Just unfamiliar. For 30 years I'd built my whole schedule around everybody else's calendar. Now they'd have to find room in mine. Neither one of us knew that dance yet. One evening I pulled a legal pad across the kitchen table and, without exactly planning to, wrote my son a letter. Not an angry one. Not a legal one. A true one. About his mother. About how scared I'd been since we lost her. About why I'd swallowed every little insult because I believed standing up for myself meant losing him too. And near the bottom, my own pen wrote a line that surprised even me. I never once needed you to choose between your wife and your father. I only needed you to notice when somebody treated your father like he didn't matter. I stared at that sentence a long while, because it was true, and true things carry weight. I folded it, sealed it, wrote his name on the front, and put it in the desk drawer. He wasn't ready yet. Maybe I wasn't either. A few days later, Sal leaned on my fence while I washed the truck. Heard the latest? Your daughter-in-law's telling people you've gotten unstable. I laughed. That's a new one. Sal grinned. This part is she's organizing a family sit-down, to clear the air. Neither one of us believed that for a second. 2 nights later, Marcus called, his voice careful. Brooke wants everyone together Saturday, to work things out. Will you come? I looked out across my own backyard, the dogwood throwing its long evening shadow over the pond, the koi moving slow beneath the surface, and I noticed something remarkable. I wasn't dreading it. I wasn't going to defend myself, or argue, or audition for anybody's respect. That season of my life was already over. "I'll be there," I said, calm as any Sunday. He exhaled. "Thank you, Dad." And then I made one more call. "Howard, I think it's time." He didn't ask time for what. He just said he'd meet me there. Now slow down with me here, because this next part I've replayed 100 times, and you've earned every second of it. Saturday came in warm and bright, cookout weather, and instead I drove to my son's house with my attorney's sedan trailing in my mirror, and the strangest passenger rode shotgun with me the whole way there. Peace. A month earlier I'd have rehearsed every argument on that drive. This time there was nothing left worth rehearsing. The truth doesn't need practice. Howard stepped out with his slim briefcase. "Ready? We're not here to fight." "I know," I said. "We're just done pretending." Inside, everyone was already gathered. Marcus, Brooke, her parents, Carol, a cousin, even Sal, invited. I'd learn later, because Brooke had heard he witnessed the cake incident and wanted him managed. The room went quiet when we walked in. Brooke clocked Howard immediately and laughed out loud. "You brought a lawyer? Seriously?" "I brought a man who's good with paperwork," I said. Her grin widened. Wow, dramatic. Howard shook every hand in the room, calm as a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus's eyes searched my face. "Dad, what is this?" "I believe," I said. Brooke wanted to clear the air. "I do," Brooke announced, planting herself by the fireplace, hands on her hips, hosting her own intervention in her own living room. "We've all been uncomfortable since the pool thing. I think Jerry owes everybody here an apology." Jerry, not Dad, not even Mr. Whitfield. Funny how respect leaves a family one word at a time. Howard glanced my way. I gave him the smallest nod, and the briefcase opened. "What is that?" Brooke said, smile still holding. Howard's voice was the same one I'd heard across his desk for 20 years, level, unhurried, inevitable. "Mr. Whitfield asked me here because some misunderstandings have developed around his estate and his future. One folder onto the coffee table, a revocable living trust. Second folder, updated medical directives. Third, revised powers of attorney and an independent professional trustee." The room's temperature changed by about 10 degrees. Marcus blinked. "You did all this?" "I did," I said. "I didn't know," he said. "I know," I said gently. Brooke crossed her arms. "I don't see why we're discussing paperwork right now." Howard looked directly at her for the first time. "I think you do." And for the first time all afternoon, Brooke stopped smiling. Howard folded his hands. "Some months ago," he said, "a caller reached my office asking general questions." Marcus frowned. "What questions?" Howard kept his eyes on Brooke. "About conservatorships." The word landed in that room like a dropped wrench. About how elderly homeowners lose financial control. About whether entering assisted living changes ownership of a house. Nobody breathed. Marcus's head turned slowly toward his wife. "You called my dad's attorney's office?" "Those were hypothetical," Brooke said, too fast. "I'm sure they were," Howard said pleasantly. "I work in brand strategy. We talk to lawyers about contracts all the time." "Plenty of people talk to lawyers about contracts," Howard agreed. "They don't typically call their father-in-law's personal attorney to ask how old men lose their houses." Brooke's mother looked down at the carpet. Her father's jaw worked, but nothing came out. And my son stared at his wife like a stranger had just unzipped his face and stepped out from underneath it. "Why?" Marcus whispered. Brooke threw her hands up. "You're all making this sound way worse than it is. I was planning ahead." "For what?" Marcus said, and his voice cracked straight down the middle. "For our future." My son took one slow step backward, physically backward, away from her, and said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. "My father's future was never your financial plan." The ceiling fan turned. Nobody moved. Brooke scanned the room for backup, her parents, the cousin, and found nothing but floorboards and folded hands. Then, from the corner, Sal Petrucci cleared his throat. "I saw it," he said. Every head in that room turned. "The cake, that wasn't an accident." "That's ridiculous," Brooke snapped. Sal didn't raise his voice. Men like Sal never have to. "I've known Jerry 19 years, he said, looking straight at her. "You looked right at that cake stand. Then you swung your arm." And into the longest silence of the whole afternoon he added the rest. "And I heard you talking out front of his house back in the spring. You and your girlfriends." Brooke's face lost its color by degrees, like a dimmer switch being turned down slow. Once the old man's in one of those places, Sal recited, word for word. This house is basically our lake cabin fund. Marcus turned back to his wife one final time, his voice coming out barely above a whisper. You told me that was a joke. Everybody's blowing this out of proportion, Brooke said. No, Marcus said. It wasn't. And that's when I stood up. Not in anger, because I wanted the whole room to hear this part at a regular, conversational volume. I didn't come here to embarrass anybody, I said. I came because I spent almost 40 years building a life with my wife in that house, and I wanted my retirement to be about fishing and old cars and Sunday dinners with my son. Instead, I found myself wondering if I needed a lawyer to keep my own front door. I looked at Brooke. I never cared about the wrench. I cared that you found it funny to humiliate me. And I cared even more. I turned to face the whole room now that somewhere along the way, I'd convinced myself that keeping the peace meant swallowing disrespect. I was wrong about that. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, and it wasn't tense. It was just honest. Maybe the first fully honest silence that family had shared in years. Howard clicked his briefcase shut. I believe our business here is finished, he said. Nobody stopped us at the door. Behind me, Marcus said one word. Dad. I turned, and my son stood there with 100 sentences jammed up in his throat, none of them able to move. Then he simply started to cry. I gave him a small, sad smile and walked out into the sunlight. In the driveway, Howard asked how I felt. I started the truck and searched for the word. Lighter, I said. He nodded like a man who'd seen it plenty of times before. That's what happens, he said, when people finally put down what was never theirs to carry. Life didn't turn to sunshine and glass after that. Real life never does. I still woke at 5:30 out of habit. My back still complained on the porch steps. Doreen's chair still sat empty across from mine at the kitchen table. Some things don't change just because you finally told the truth out loud. 3 days later, Marcus called. I let it ring through, not out of punishment, just because I didn't have the words yet, and I went and mowed the lawn instead. A week after that, he knocked on the door himself. He looked wrung out, dark circles, 3 days of stubble, no armor left on him at all. He looked like the boy who used to come home swallowing back tears after a lost Little League game. Can I come in? Course. I made coffee. He sat down in Doreen's chair without thinking about it, then froze halfway into the seat. Sorry. It's all right, I said, and meant it. We didn't touch the coffee for a good 5 minutes. Then he said, I didn't know, Dad. I believe you, I said, and I watched him decide to be braver than that. But that's not the whole truth, he said, staring down into his cup. I saw the little comments over the years. I heard the jokes. I kept telling myself they were small. They were, I said softly. He looked up. But together they added up to a direction. His eyes filled. I should have stopped it a long time ago. I put my hand over his on the table and told him the truest thing I had. You loved your wife. I still do, he whispered. I know, I said. And I love you. I know that too, he said, and cried the quiet kind of crying that comes from finally setting a weight down. When he left, he hugged me harder than he had in years, and I let myself hope we'd turned a corner. We hadn't. Not yet. 2 weeks later he was back, angry this time, though not really at me. At the wreckage. Brooke says everyone ganged up on her. She says Sal exaggerated. She says your lawyer ambushed her. I said nothing. Then he asked the question he'd actually driven over to ask. Can't we all just move past it? I looked at my son a long moment. Then I walked to the desk in the living room, opened the drawer, took out the envelope with his name written across the front, and when he reached for it, I gently drew it back. Not yet, I said. His face fell. Dad, why? Because you're not ready, I said. And because right now, son, you're still trying to manage everybody else's pain except your own. He wiped his eyes. I don't know what to do. You don't have to solve it today, I said. He hugged me at the door. Neither of us said her name. Another month turned over. Summer leaned into fall. The dogwood went red at the edges. Thursdays still belonged to the veterans' garage. Saturdays still belonged to Sal or a swap meet somewhere out past the county line. And for the first time since Doreen died, I wasn't just passing the time anymore. I was spending it on purpose. Then, one cool afternoon in October, a third knock came at my door. Marcus stood on the porch alone, and something in his face had settled calmer, older, cleaner somehow. He sat down and said 2 words. I left. I didn't ask for details. He gave me the one that mattered anyway. I asked her one question, he said. I asked if she'd have done that to you if Mom were still alive. He smiled the saddest smile I'd seen on him since the funeral. She couldn't answer me, Dad. Not one word. I closed my eyes a second, for Doreen mostly. And then Marcus said the sentence that told me my son had finally come all the way back. I spent years calling it keeping the peace, he said. But all I was really doing was asking you to carry all of it by yourself. Then he surprised me. He got up, walked to my refrigerator, and pulled out a butcher paper package. 2 racks of ribs. Stopped at Krasinski's on the way over, he said. Planning on cooking dinner? I asked. If you'll let me help, he said. And for the first time since his mother died, somebody stood next to me at that smoker instead of just waiting at the table for the plate to arrive. The coals caught and started talking. My son reached for the recipe box on the counter, pulled out his mother's card, and squinted at the slanted blue handwriting. The coffee goes in with the brown sugar? Right there with it, I said. Mom would be proud of you, he said, and his voice didn't entirely hold together on the last word. He laughed through the tears anyway. I finally understand why these Sundays mattered so much to you. So do I said, now more than ever. When the ribs were done, Marcus carried my plate out to me himself, careful with both hands, and set it down in front of me, and looked me in the eye, and said 6 words. Eat it while it's hot, Dad. I don't think he'll ever understand the size of that sentence. Months earlier, somebody had knocked a cake with my name on it into the dirt to show a whole yard full of people exactly what I was worth. Now my own son was standing guard over my plate like it mattered. No speech, no ceremony, just respect, served warm. He and Brooke finalized things the following spring. No courtroom theatrics, no celebration on my part, honestly. I felt more grief than victory watching it happen. No father wishes for his son's marriage to end. But I'd learned something by then that couldn't be unlearned. A family can't survive on respect that only ever flows in one direction. These days, Sunday dinner still happens on Pinecrest Lane. The guest list is shorter than it used to be. Some weeks it's just me and Marcus. Some weeks Sal wanders over, or one of the fellas from the veterans' garage stops by after church with a case of something cold. The table isn't as full as it once was. But nobody sitting at it is performing anymore, and the laughter is the real kind. Every so often I catch myself glancing over at the deep end of that koi pond. The wrench never did come back up on its own. I finally fished it out with a net a week later, and it works fine. A little rusted at the joint, but fine. What stayed with me wasn't the splash itself. It was everything I finally understood standing next to it. I used to believe protecting my family meant absorbing whatever they decided to hand me. I don't believe that anymore. Getting older doesn't make a man worth less. It just means he's finally logged enough miles to tell the difference between love and obligation. And once you learn to tell those two things apart, friend, the whole road gets a little lighter under you. So here's the one thing I'd ask you to try this week, and it won't cost you a dime. Next time somebody's little joke lands on you the same target, one more time say one calm sentence back, out loud, no anger in it. That one lands on me, not with me, just the facts. You'll learn everything you need to know from whatever happens next. And here's the question I'd leave on your table tonight, the one I chewed on for 6 years longer than I should have. How much of what you've been calling keeping the peace was really just you keeping quiet? Now it's your turn, because I've second-guessed that splash more times than I can count. Put a 1 in the comments if you think the wrench in the pond was exactly the right answer, one quiet gesture after years of noise. Put a 2 if you think I should have used my words that day instead of $340 of forged steel. Put a 3 if you think I waited entirely too long, and the real mistake was 6 years of swallowed jokes. Some nights I'd vote 3 myself. Tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. It still amazes me how far a backyard story like this one can travel. And if you've ever been the one at the table everybody's just kidding about, or the parent whose own kids forgot to ask if you were all right, tell me down below. Somebody watching this tonight is rehearsing an apology for something that was done to them, and they need to hear that they're allowed to put it down. If this one meant something to you, subscribe and stick around a while. I've got a whole lifetime of these, and this little corner of the internet only stays lit because folks like you keep coming back to it. Thank you, truly, for sitting with me tonight. I'll see you in the next one.